Rohan, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, তো স্যার জয়েন করছেন, আমরা তো ফেসবুক লাইভ অলরেডি হয়ে গেছি।
So we can begin with the introduction and he will join.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. So we are on the verge of 10th CME of Web CME series on adherence in healthcare, and we are really thankful to InnovoCare HealthSoft Solution for organizing this consecutive CMEs. So today the topic is about benign prostatic hyperplasia, and for that we are really thankful that Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, who is a renowned clinical pharmacologist, he will chair today's session, and there are some technical glitch from his side. So there is he is trying to join. So, but as we are approaching more than 4 minutes from our scheduled time, so may I request, and we are that's why we are really fortunate to have a very renowned neurosurgeon in the city of Kolkata, Dr. Sandeep Gupta. Sandeep Gupta had done his MS and MCH, and now he is the associate professor in the Department of Urology at SSKM Hospital at IPJMER, and also he is attached with multiple renowned private hospitals. So we are really thankful that Dr. Gupta agreed to share his expertise on this very important and relevant topic in today's time, that is benign hyperplasia of prostate, the management, and also he will touch upon about some important points on the adherence issue. So may I request Dr. Sandeep Gupta to deliver his talk.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. So let us start the session for the day. And I've been asked to speak on benign prostatic hyperplasia, the treatment adherence in management of BPH. So I'll just share my screen and then we can start. Share screen. Am I visible? Is
Yes,
my
your
presentation?
Yes, your slides are visible. You have to make it full screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I think it's okay now.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Oh, okay, sir. So benign prostatic hyperplasia is one of the most prevalent prostatic disorders affecting aging men. And BPH refers to combination of obstructive and or irritative voiding symptoms. What are the symptoms of BPH? One more thing I would like to say is that previously it was taken as a hypertrophy, but that is increase in cell size. But now it's proven that it's hyperplasia, that is increase in cell number. That is one point. So what are the symptoms? Obstructive symptoms include poor urinary flow, straining pattern, hesitancy, partial or complete retention of urine, and overflow incontinence. Irritative symptoms are frequency, urgency, and nocturia. Why these symptoms happen? Due to glandulostromal hyperplasia of the prostate. This leads to prostatic enlargement and bladder outlet obstruction, which in turn leads to increased bladder pressure and reduced urine flow. So this is basically the pathophysiology of BPH. How does it affect our quality of life? Urgency, increased frequency, incontinence in public places, sleep disturbances, sexual dysfunction, and reduced sexual satisfaction. So, what are the treatment options? The foremost is the medical treatment. Alpha adrenergic blockers are the most commonly used medications for BPH. Then we have 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, which are basically PDE5 inhibitors. And we have combination therapies. And nowadays, tadalafil is also being used for the management of BPH. It is especially used in those patients who are intolerant to alpha blockers and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. What are the indications of surgical therapy? Absolute are two: intractable urinary retention and urinary insufficiency caused by bladder outlet obstruction. Relative indications are failure of medical therapy, recurrent cystitis, bladder calculi, recurrent hematuria. What is treatment adherence? WHO defines treatment adherence as the extent to which person's behavior, that is taking medication, following a diet, lifestyle changes, all this corresponds with the agreed recommendations from a healthcare provider. The 5 dimensions of adherence are social and economic, healthcare system related, condition related, therapy related, and patient related. What are the problems with lack of adherence? It poses a challenge for treating a wide range of chronic medical conditions and can result in serious adverse health outcomes for patients. With the introduction of safe and effective medical therapy for BPH, a predominantly surgical condition has transformed into a chronic medical illness. Few studies have examined adherence in patients with LUTS or BPH. The results from the studies demonstrated that a high percentage of men with LUTS were reasonably adherent and persistent with their index therapies, especially men taking combination therapies. Although combination therapy was not the most common index therapy, the observed adherence and persistence rate suggests that patients likely experience urinary symptom improvement to the extent that they are willing to tolerate the challenges of remaining persistent, including cost and inconvenience for an average of 6 years. In one study, the factors affecting adherence for LUTS medication among BPH patients were measured. They found symptomatic relief, a risk or fear of taking medications, stopping taking medicines when feeling better, and affordability of medicine. They were the primary reasons affecting adherence to the treatment. Why there is non-adherence to the medications? Patients think that medication is not helping them in reducing the symptoms. The possible explanation for this is patients fail to realize or were not informed about the longer time taken for improvement in the symptoms. Adherence to medication is crucial to treat BPH. Patient adherence to pharmacotherapy for BPH associated LUTS is low. How should we improve the treatment adherence? Use of fixed dose combination therapy, and explain that persistence on medical therapy is associated with a lower rate of hospitalization for BPH related symptoms. However, also important is the commitment from patient to take the medication as prescribed and for the duration of time. What are my suggestions? Focus on communication with the patient, explain the nature and progression of the disease, deliver education, purpose, expected time frame, possible obstacles, and ways to improve the success of treatment. Thirdly, provide easily accessible assistance. The faster you address the questions, the more likely patient will not deviate from the treatment. And fourth, address the insurance and treatment cost barriers. Determine whether patient can afford their out-of-pocket costs and secure financial assistance for patients who need help. Treat all patients uniquely. Allocate time to understand what obstacles may hinder successful treatment and cater your efforts to address those specific obstacles. Don't go it alone. Involve family members, primary care physicians, specialists, nurses, pharmacists, therapists. Improving coordination between those having positive impact on treatment adherence. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. So I think Professor Shantanu Tripathi sir has also joined. So may I request Tripathi sir, please unmute yourself.
Hello,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm audible?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Okay. I'm very sorry. I was held up with something else, and there were also issues of connectivity. I could listen to only maybe last 3-4 minutes of the presentation by Dr. Gupta. So it's a wonderful initiative, and it's important, like in any other disease where long-term care is a requirement. Adherence is definitely an issue which cannot be neglected, and it is great that you have taken up this particular topic, benign prostatic hyperplasia, and where treatment adherence has its own importance. I must thank Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Sandeep Gupta, who has spared his time, valued time, and made a great presentation, I believe, and all participants attending must be benefited by what has been shared. And I would request Dr. Gupta to please stay back for the whole session. The next would be, of course, by Dr. Shambhu Samrat Samazdar, who will be from a clinical pharmacologist perspective, will deliberate from his side that how clinical pharmacological support or clinical pharmacological expertise might help for better patient outcome, and what is the scope. This is of course not yet to that extent optimally tapped, but now provided the facilities are around and opportunities are there. So let us hear what Dr. Shambhu Samrat Samazdar has to share as a clinical pharmacologist towards better patient outcome, of course, for strengthening treatment adherence. Dr. Shambhu is otherwise well known to our audience, and Dr. Sandeep Gupta, if you can please stay back for some time more. After this presentation, sure. Also you have your you can also give your inputs. Okay. Thank you very much.
Can we take some, two questions from the chat box to Dr. Sandeep Gupta? Then we can start.
Yes. Why not? Why not? Please go ahead.
Okay. So, Dr.
So, sir, one question is there. I am seeing Dr. Anish has said, how long can we continue? Am I right, Dr. Shambhu? This is the question.
Yeah. Regarding the alpha blockers.
Okay. Correct. Now, the thing is that he had mentioned that the patient is less than 45 years. Now, the thing is that we try to prevent surgical intervention as much as possible before 50 years of age, mainly because the prostatic surgery leads to retrograde ejaculation and sexual side effects are there. So, we assume that at least till age of 50,
there is some audio issues.
Yeah, Dr. Gupta, we cannot hear you.
Now?
Now it is okay.
Now we can hear you.
So less than 45 years of age, normally prostatic hyperplasia is very uncommon. It is more of high bladder neck and other cystitis related changes which lead to the lower urinary tract symptoms. But still, if he's having a USG proven or a DRE proven BPH, then we should give the alpha blockers at least till his age of 50 is crossed, and then if he is willing, we can go for the permanent cure, which is surgical intervention. Then he won't need any further alpha blockers or 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. But till that age, he should be taking. Now, which alpha blocker, that is of question. So normally young sexually active males, we give alfuzosin, which is the having the least sexual side effects. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now, what is the scope for medical management post surgery? There are a good number of complications also after surgery. There is dribbling, depending on, of course, how the surgery has been done. Particularly when you talk of how much of the gland is to be resected. What is your opinion on that?
Now, sir, post-void dribbling is actually very common post-surgery.
Yeah.
But unless you have not resected beyond the varus and your sphincter is intact, normally this post-void dribbling settles down with time. And it is more common actually with holmium laser surgeries rather than the conventional TURP.
With time means how much time? Because it is very frustrating for many patients
Most of the
post-surgical
patients,
dribbling.
3 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, by 3 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks. But if the dribbling is persistent, then the first thing we should do is do a urine routine and culture. Because many times UTI leads to this symptom.
Yeah.
So we have to see whether any underlying UTI has occurred because of the TURP or not. If UTI is also not there, patient is having really continuous dribbling, then you have to think of some amount of sphincter injury, and we have to proceed accordingly.
Okay, thank you. What was the next
Okay, sir.
question? Other question, Dr. Shambhu?
Next
Now,
question.
the next question is how to click USG peak of prostate from my phone. I really don't know how to answer this question. I mean, a USG peak of prostate from phone, you just take a pic or from the monitor. I don't know what they want to know.
Another question is alfuzosin in which dose we can continue years?
The standard dose is 10 milligram once at bedtime. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Alpha blockers are best taken at bedtime. Many people are giving it after breakfast, but I generally, the standard is at bedtime, so we should give at bedtime.
Now, the traditional teaching is also to give bedtime because of its possible hypotension issue, postural hypotension issue.
Yeah, right.
So,
true,
of course, with the newer molecules, the possibility is less. The risk is relatively less as compared to, say, the prototype prazosin, which is no longer possibly used commonly. So, but then bedtime is always recommended. Yeah, thank you. All right, now, Dr. Shambhu, you can now go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Shambhu is a clinical pharmacologist by training, and he is also a quite busy practitioner, particularly in the field of diabetes and metabolic disorders, as also in the general medical problems, okay, hypertension and diabetes mainly. Over to Dr. Shambhu.
Okay. So thank you, sir. So it is really honored to sit in the same dais, though it is an web dais, with Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, who is an eminent clinical pharmacologist in the country, and with Dr. Sandeep Gupta, who is a very renowned neurosurgeon in the city of Kolkata. So my topic of discussion today is about the prescription reconciliation in patients who have benign prostatic hyperplasia and whether there is some role of clinical pharmacology. So we'll discuss some cases, real life cases, and try to understand the need of at least using clinical pharmacological principles while managing benign hyperplasia of prostate patients. So this is a 76-year male, type 2 diabetes with PHP, with hypertension and CKD. Now we can see the medication list. The patient is on glyclazide, glargine, linagliptin, cilnidipine once daily, telmisartan, metolazone, prazosin, nebivolol, atorvastatin, and clopidogrel. This particular patient had visited neurosurgery OPD for management of PHP, and there he was prescribed with this fixed dose combination of sildosin and dutasteride, and it was initiated after 3 days. The old man had suffered a fall while going to bathroom at night and landed up with a neck femur fracture. So this is the case, and this case actually spoke us the need of clinical pharmacological reconciliation when a patient is taking multiple drugs. And what is clinical pharmacological reconciliation? Number one, we should choose drug. We should check drugs the patient is taking, whether they are for any valid clinical indication or not. So there should be a clear therapeutic goal and evidence-based therapy, evidence-based practice for each prescribed drugs. Also need to see the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic rationale for prescribing drugs, along with the right dosage regimen need to be checked. When there is some polypharmacy, what is polypharmacy? Though there are different definitions available for polypharmacy, but in general, we define polypharmacy as, in case of an ambulatory patient, if the patient is taking 3 or more drugs, so more than 2 medicines for one indication, one disease, then we can call it or define it as polypharmacy. Obviously, there is some exceptions like tuberculosis, because in tuberculosis, the disease itself requires 4 drugs. So that is an exception, but in general, one disease, if it is more than 2 drugs, then we can call it as polypharmacy. So we need to adjust the prescription as much as possible below 3 drugs, 2 or 1 drugs, like that. Another important goal for clinical pharmacology reconciliation is to improve adherence, to check the patient safety issues, different possible adverse drug reactions or adverse drug-drug interactions, whether the therapeutics have some adverse impact on quality of life, and most importantly, we need to address the medication errors, and where the chance of errors are maximum at the time of transition of care related issue. So maybe the patient was in home, then needs some hospital admission. So in hospital also there are different category of wards. Initially the patient admitted in critical care unit, then the patient when stabilized come to HDU, then the general ward. So in every state there is a possible errors due to this transition of care related issue. So we need to be very careful, and when a patient is going to multiple super specialists, again there is a chance, because it is not always possible for patient to recall every drug he or she is taking. So often he missed to name one drug, and particular super specialist is unable to know about that drug the patient is taking. And for that, the patient will end up with some serious adverse drug-drug interactions. And these are a few important principles of clinical pharmacology care. Number one, we need to treat adverse drug reactions. We need to avoid the prescribing cascade. And for that, to prevent adverse drug reaction, it is very important, specifically while seeing our geriatric patient, we should start low, go slow, but yes, obviously we have to go. There should be some patient-specific changes. Maybe the patient has compromised renal and hepatic function. We need to individualize the intervention for specific cases. Need of deprescribing. We need to stop any drug that without known benefit, and we need to discontinue a drug with actual or potential adverse effect. And sometimes substitution within class, that also can eliminate adverse drug interactions and adverse drug reactions. So this flow chart is very important to understand the need of medication reconciliation and where that transition of care related medication errors can happen. So here you can see from home to admission to a healthcare facility that requires an admission reconciliation. We should have a best possible medication history, and that can be from interviewing the patient and family. The most important is to check the medication by vials or strips, to check that directly, or sometimes going through the list. Here it is not possible because we don't have this database, government medication database, which is present in US, UK, but most probably a very recent decision taken by our national central government may emphasize the need of this database. The previous patient health records, previous hospital admission history, these are the important source of medication information. Then when entering into the healthcare facility, it is very important to check the ongoing medications in the hospitals, and we need to adjust them with the home medications. Even the internal transfer from ICCU to HDU to general ward, that is very crucial, and we need to be very vigilant. And after that, the second time, when the reconciliations need to be done carefully, that during the time of discharge, and when the decision to discharge happens, we need to again plan for a best possible medication discharge. And for that, we need reconciled discharge prescriptions, the physician discharge summary, and patient medication schedule. And we need to cautiously taking care of the ongoing medications before admission, and the information should be percolated to the patient carefully, otherwise there will be some unnecessary duplications. So in this case, this patient, when visited to us, we had done the cardiac autonomic neuropathy screening. So this is the finding we can find. There is a gross or deranged parasympathetic function. And also the sympathetic function deranged. You can see from this slide, there is postural. I am sorry, it was little like no postural hypotension, but we can see from here, there is definite a postural hypotension. This is I can say a mistake from printing. So the patient suffered from postural hypotension. So what we did here, so what was the problem in that particular patient? So he was advised with this fixed dose combination of sildosin and budesonide. We all know that sildosin is itself not cause that much postural hypotension, but this particular patient is also taking another alpha-1 blocker, that is prazosin, and in the medication list it was missed, and there is a duplication of alpha-1 blockers that happened. The patient took prazosin along with this sildosin, which aggravate the postural hypotension, and the patient suffered fall. So we had done this reconciliation to this particular patient. The sildenafil, which was 20 milligram initially, it was we had prescribed 10 milligram twice daily. And why we had prescribed, I am just showing this ABPM report. The patient was also done this ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, and you can see generally the patient is taking the sildenafil at night at around 10 p.m. like that, and that is why there is a beautiful nocturnal dipping. But what happened in the evening time, when we all know the half-life of sildenafil is at around 2 to 4 hours. So in the trough concentration of sildenafil, there is a rise in blood pressure, and that is why, as we had divided the sildenafil 10 milligram twice daily, it takes care of that particular action of that trough action, and there is a 24-hour blood pressure reduction. Now coming to, while talking about BHP management, this is very important to know about the classification subgroups of alpha-1 receptor, and it is very important to note that in case of vessels, because when we are considering the side effect, the adverse effect of alpha-1 blocker, the vessel is an important part, and it is due to that alpha-1 blocking of this prazosin or other alpha-1 blockers, it causes vasodilation, and that is responsible for blood pressure reduction, and also it gives benefit in terms of hypertension management, but also it causes postural hypotension due to that vasodilation. Now if we can see that alpha-1b subtype, this alpha-1b subtype is very important, because this is the, we can say, the principal receptor which modulates the arteries. It influences alpha-1 and alpha-1b of arteries also. So both subtypes, large caliber and small caliber vessels, are contracted if we stimulate the alpha-1b receptor. So if a drug which can block this alpha-1b receptor, it causes profound vasodilation. Whereas the alpha-1a, now you just see here the genitourinary system, in the bladder, in the prostate, the alpha-1a has the dominant role in contraction, and whereas the alpha-1b does not have a clear-cut role or very lower level of transcripts there. So if we can block selectively the alpha-1a, that will actually gives benefits in BHP patient, and it will not cost us in terms of producing postural hypotension. So this is very important diagram we can see, and I request all of you to go through this article published in the British Journal of Pharmacology in 2019. This is a very interesting article, and this article gives us the idea why we should go more specific to this alpha 1A subtype of alpha receptors, alpha 1 receptors, for getting benefits in terms of symptoms reduction in BHP patient. And this is again a big diagram where you can see the prazosin. Prazosin has the almost equal effect, you can see, in the alpha 1D, alpha 1A, and alpha 1B receptor. And that is why, though prazosin can be good for BHP patient, but it will produce postural hypotension due to the selectivity to the vessels also of that alpha B. Now, if we go by the different newer generations alpha 1 blocker, there we will found that the terazosin and doxazosin, they are also non-subtype selective. So they have overall equal alpha 1A, alpha 1D, and alpha 1B effect. Alfuzosin also has a non-subtype selective action, but it is little bit better than that prazosin, and as Dr. Gupta has beautifully mentioned, it has lesser effect on the erectile function. But if we go by the tamsulosin and other drugs, drugs like sildosin, they are more selective to alpha 1A type subtype and alpha 1B subtypes. Their selectivity to alpha 1B is much less. So tamsulosin and sildosin, they are more selective to alpha 1A and alpha 1D, and that is why sometimes it may produce abnormality in erectile function and ejaculation. There is abnormal ejaculation known as retrograde ejaculation with this tamsulosin. But they are safe in terms of, or relative safe in terms of development of postural hypotension. So there are three subtypes of alpha receptors, as already we had discussed: alpha 1A, alpha 1B, and alpha 1D. But 70% of the subtypes in the prostate being alpha 1A. And what we had discussed, that alpha 1B located primarily in the peripheral vasculature, and they are generally responsible for the blood pressure regulation. So if we block alpha 1B, then it will produce that vasodilation and drop in the blood pressure. There is very little effect on benign prostatic hyperplasia patient with that alpha 1B. So all available alpha antagonists, they have activity at all receptors, but tamsulosin and sildosin, they are semi-selective for that alpha 1A subtype, and tamsulosin is sometimes more selective for all subtypes, but that ratio of selectivity for the alpha 1A subtype to alpha 1B or alpha 1B is greater for sildosin than tamsulosin. But here it is important to note that no clinical studies till date had suggested that sildosin is better than tamsulosin, like that. No, that much robust clinical trials suggest that. And the non-inferiority trial was done with sildosin and tamsulosin when sildosin came into the market. But one thing is important to mention in that the dose of tamsulosin used in that particular trial was little bit in half dose. That means sildosin was compared with tamsulosin half dose, that is 0.2 milligram, and it shows equivalent thing. So what is important for our first case, that we need to check the patient's ongoing medication. The medication list is very important, and we will found we can found in from that list that there is a duplication. The patient was already on prazosin. On top of that, he was prescribed with another alpha 1 blocker, that is sildosin, and that causes that postural hypotension and fall. Now, another case, a 62-year male type 2 diabetic and hypertensive need cataract surgery, and this is the medication history. Patient is on vildagliptin, metformin twice daily, atorvastatin 20 milligram once daily, telmisartan 40 milligram once daily. Well controlled blood pressure and glycemic status. Now he had visited to neurosurgeon for BHP, benign hyperplasia of prostate is there. So the physician referred that patient to neurosurgeon. So what will be your advice here from the perspective of neurosurgeon and from the perspective of physician? What we should know while sending a patient who had developed cataract and is going to surgery? So what should be our thinking or what are the rationale behind that thinking? So this is an important chart. This chart is always hammered in our brain from our MBBS days, second year. So in the bladder, the sympathetic effect is if we stimulate that, bladder causes the detrusor muscle will be relaxed, and that is by that beta 2 receptor, and the parasympathetic effect is contraction by the stimulation of M3 receptor. In the sphincter, that sphincter causes contraction due to alpha 1 stimulation and relaxation by the parasympathetic effect by M3 stimulation. Now, why I am also taking care of this area pupil and ciliary muscle, that is I am going to discuss in little bit details. That is in sympathetic effect that causes pupil to dilate due to that alpha 1 stimulation, and parasympathetic effect we know it causes constriction by the M3 stimulation. And in the ciliary muscle, if there is the beta stimulation, specifically the beta 2 stimulation, that causes relaxation, and parasympathetic effect is contraction due to that M3 receptor stimulation. Now coming to eye first. So this is the normal eye. The muscarinic stimulation happened. So what will be done? In the sphincter muscle, there is the M3 receptor, and the sphincter muscle will be contracted. And if there is sphincter muscle is contracted, so what happens? There will be meiosis. And when there will be a adrenergic stimulation, the alpha 1 is present in the radial muscle. So if there is alpha 1 stimulation, so there will be a contraction of the radial muscle, and that eye causes the mydriasis. Now, if we block alpha 1, then what happens? The patient is taking some alpha 1 blocker. So what will be the effect? The mydriasis will not properly occur because the radial muscle will not be contracted because of that alpha 1 antagonist. And in case of bladder, we all know that why we need to block that alpha 1, because if we stimulate alpha 1 receptor, alpha-1 stimulation causes the internal sphincter contraction along with the prostatic contraction. So that will cause the narrowing of the urethra. If we block the alpha-1 receptor, then it will be dilated and the prostate also, that which was contracted, will be relaxed. So there will be a proper passage of urine from bladder to urethra. Now, if we are using this alpha-1 receptor blocker in the patients who are going to cataract surgery, what will happen? So this is a picture. We can see the iris and it has been stretched. If the proper mydriasis not happen, so there will be a problem in cataract surgery, and that is known as intraoperative floppy iris syndrome. So that means a poor preoperative pupil dilation. So a floppy iris with a propensity to billow and prolapse from the surgical wounds. There will be a progressive intraoperative meiosis because of that alpha-1 blockage, and there will be higher incidence of complications like posterior capsular rupture, vitreous loss, and iris trauma. So we need to assess this IFIS. Why? Because the 40 to 90% patients on tamsulosin, they develop this IFIS, and there is 2.3 times increased post-operative complication rate. And the important thing to note is that if I am deprescribed tamsulosin before surgery, so that will not prevent IFIS. So even stopping the drug like tamsulosin 1 year before surgery, that also not prevent the occurrence of IFIS. And only the 1 week use also can trigger this IFIS. So what is very important to note, that if we are recognize the ability of tamsulosin or other alpha-1 blockers that it can cause IFIS, that is a very important factor. This recognition is very important, which can improve the cataract surgery outcome. And it has been seen that when the surgeon is aware that yes, the patient has used tamsulosin, then the complication rate decreased from 12% to only 0.6%. And this is why the medication list is very important, and whether the patient is on alpha-1 antagonist, that is very important why patient is chosen for cataract surgery. So this line is very important. When offered alpha-1 antagonist treatment, men should be asked if cataract surgery is planned, and therapy should be delayed until the procedure is completed. If we know that yes, the patient requires cataract surgery, so we can delay the initiation of alpha-1 blocker maybe for few months, 1 month or 2 months, like that. The patient will undergo the cataract surgery. Then we can start, after having the cataract surgery, we can start the alpha-1 blocker. So another case, a 64-year male, diabetes, BHP, hypertension. This is the medication list: glimepiride, metformin BD, dildagliptin 50 BD, amlodipine, telmisartan, chlorthalidone, atorvastatin, aspirin, and paroxetine. Now, the patient had visited neurosurgery OPD, and it was prescribed there the fixed dose combination of glutasoride plus tamsulosin. So what happened? Third day of OPD visit, that neurosurgery OPD visit, at 2 a.m., the patient suffered sudden onset chest pain, palpitation, blackout, and fall in the room while going to bathroom. and then admitted in hospital. So what happened? Everyone think that, okay, so the medicine is responsible, which was that just started 3 days back. But it is also important to note this particular patient was taking over the counter sildenafil 50 milligram. And at that day when he was admitted, he took that sildenafil. And what is sildenafil? We all know this is a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, and it causes rise in the cyclic GM3, which cause vasodilation. Along with, though the tamsulosin has very less selectivity in the alpha 1 B type subtype of alpha 1 receptor, but it also causes vasodilation. So there is in the terms of adverse event, the vasodilation, there is a synergism between these two, and the patient has some vasodilation induced hypotension, and that may cause palpitation and other issues. But what happened in the hospital? It was found that another important issue, you can see in this picture, the patient has tinea crudis extensive, and for that the patient was on itraconazole. Again, from separate dermatology OPD, he was taking itraconazole in the doses of 200 milligram per day. And we all know that itraconazole is a CYP3A4 inhibitor. And if a CYP3A4 inhibitor is used along with alpha-1 antagonist, the concentration of the alpha-1 antagonist will be more in the blood, and there will be more chance of adverse effects from the alpha-1 antagonist like tamsulosin also. So this drug history was missed, and we need to take care of this drug history carefully. And another important issue is that tamsulosin is extensively metabolized not only by CYP3A4 but also by CYP2D6. And now I just want to go back to the previous slide, and I want to focus on this drug paroxetine, SSRI. Paroxetine inhibits CYP2D6, and that is why there is more accumulation of tamsulosin in the blood. Along with that, if we go by the sildenafil metabolism, that also predominantly by CYP3A4. So itraconazole not only increase the level of tamsulosin, but also increase the level of sildenafil, and the synergistic effect of this tamsulosin and sildenafil producing vasodilation is more here due to this increased availability in the blood. Along with that, as the patient is taking paroxetine, it inhibits the CYP2D6. It aggravates or it increases more the concentration of tamsulosin because of the lesser metabolism of tamsulosin, and the patient has this type of atrocity. So this is very important. The medication list is very important. Medication history is very important. And that is why the principles of clinical pharmacology can optimize by identifying the ways to reduce the polypharmacy, specifically in elderly, reduce the dose of potentially inappropriate medications in older patients, avoid drug-drug and drug disease interactions, adjust dose of renal and hepatic impairment, avoid therapeutic duplication, and avoiding the prescribing cascade. And we need to enhance medication adherence by simplifying the regimen. Maybe the pill organizers and drug calendars can be helpful. These round-back checkups are very important. We need to check what are the medicine the patient is taking, and we need to educate older adults on how to safe and effectively take medications, because this informed prescribing is very important. And we all know prescriber and the patient are connected by this prescription. It is very important to acknowledge that prescribing is a risky behavior. And what is rational therapeutics? Rational therapeutics means the balancing perfectly between benefits and risks. With that, I just want to thank you all. If there is any question or comment, then we will have some more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shambho. And there is one question here, and that is why alfuzosin don't cause floppy iris.
Okay, so there is no study like that alfuzosin will not cause floppy iris. The most common drug for BHP is used is tamsulosin, and mostly the floppy iris syndrome was seen with this tamsulosin. But other alpha-1 blockers also have the similar uh, property to produce this. And as already we had discussed about that, the mechanism behind that floppy iris, then I think we should have a consensus like that. Every alpha-1 blocker has a probability to produce this type of floppy iris syndrome, post-operative floppy iris syndrome. Okay, so in the last case, what we had mentioned, that is the patient was on itraconazole, and itraconazole is a CYP3A4 inhibitor. And as we all know that the patient was taking tamsulosin. Tamsulosin is metabolized by that CYP3A4, and so there will be, as we are using itraconazole, so there will be increased concentration of the tamsulosin in the blood, and also CYP3A4 inhibitors like itraconazole will decrease the metabolism of sildenafil also. So there will be a increased concentration of the sildenafil in the blood also. So both of these drugs, the concentration will be more, and for that their pharmacodynamic effect of like vasodilation will be again more, and the patient has a synergism in terms of adverse effects. Along with that, the patient was on paroxetine. Paroxetine is nothing but a SSRI which has a role on inhibiting the CYP2D6 also. And here the tamsulosin, the patient was initiated, that also metabolized by that CYP2D6. So most probably, as the patient is taking paroxetine, that causes again the reduction of metabolism by the CYP2D6 of tamsulosin, and so the tamsulosin concentration will be more, and that can cause the aggravated effect of tamsulosin and tamsulosin induced hypotension or vasodilation, we can say, and that aggravates the this side effects. So you mentioned PKPD study. No, I don't mention any PKPD study. I mentioned that we should be very cautious while prescribing regarding the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic property of drugs, so that our prescriptions offers more safer therapeutics.
Okay, that's great. If there are any further comments or questions. So both these two sessions were very, very useful, and Dr. Shambho in his session has also highlighted the importance of having a broad view of what the patient is finally getting not just from, if I am the prescriber, not just from me, whether the patient is simultaneously receiving other medications prescribed by other doctors, and not sometimes even if it is not a prescribed medicine, whether the patient himself is trying to self-medicate, if not from the modern allopathic medicine, could it be from some other systems also? So it has to be looked into from a broad holistic perspective, rather than just in my own therapeutic expertise area. And Dr. Shambhu has very beautifully explained how the cross-discipline crosstalk, which usually more commonly does not happen always, that can create a lot of issues and lot of risks. Now, you might have also noticed the title of today's this thing was adherence in BPH. Now, when we talk of adherence, we actually mean patient adherence, and that is right also. When you talk of adherence, we actually refer to what extent the patients, the WHO, typical WHO definition is the extent to which a person's behavior in terms of taking medicine, following a diet, or executing a lifestyle changes as advised by his physician, whether it corresponds to the agreed recommendations from healthcare provider. This agreed recommendations means when it is being advised, whether the healthcare provider or the physician has also discussed this with the patient and patient has agreed. That's how this comes in the definition. So it is from the patient's perspective. But then the way we discussed today, the whole session, initially by Dr. Sandeep Gupta and then Dr. Shambhu Somrat Samasdar, I think we are going a little beyond just patients following the treatment or patients complying with the treatment or adhering to the treatment that is prescribed. It is on a much broader perspective. It is also probably in terms of whether the care providers, from their angle also, what they are prescribing, what is being dispensed. And then even Dr. Shambhu has mentioned about reconciliation. When a patient comes and gets admitted in the hospital, what medicines the patient was getting, and then in hospital he might be getting some other medicines. Okay, and then when the patient is getting discharged, given a list, and when he goes back, whether he is taking medicines from the discharge slip as well as taking medicines which he was getting pre-hospital. This kind of consideration is what is called treatment reconciliation or prescription reconciliation, which is also a very, very important issue, because beyond one doctor prescribes, how ultimately things are happening. Okay, in a hospital, there is a teamwork, and also in the solo practice there is a need for a teamwork. Not just the physician who is prescribing, the pharmacist who is dispensing or advising the patient how to take medicine, but beyond that also there is a need or scope for reviewing, okay, periodically, how the patient is trying to comply or trying to adhere to the treatment given by different doctors, different prescribers. It is because finally it is the patient who is the final common path, and he is to take all the medicines prescribed by 3 or 4 or 5 different physicians. So from that angle, it becomes very important for this reconciliation, for the medication review, etc. And Dr. Shambhu has also mentioned about that brown bag concept. Okay, in totality, one has to consider. And both Dr. Sandeep and Dr. Shambhu has also gone to the extent of advising that if we expand the philosophy of adherence, the patient is supposed to adhere to prescribed medicines, but then the prescriber is also expected to adhere to the pharmacological principles, to the standard treatment protocol, which is based on evidence, and also to take into account from a holistic perspective, after all, what the patient might be ultimately taking, okay, and how the different medicines that the patient is trying to take, whether they have any kind of incompatibility between among them. So for that, one has to go beyond his own specialty or own discipline, and also consider to have a dialogue with the example that has been given very clearly. It shows that an elderly male is likely to be suffering from BPH, is going to be treated with alpha-1 blocker, etc. But then the same person might also have his cataract, which needs to be surgically operated, and whether the ophthalmologist is taking a medication history, and if he finds that it is a alpha-1 blocker, whether he also has this in the back of his mind that this can also cause this kind of a complication. Okay, all these issues, and that's why there is a need to have somebody, okay, whether he's a clinical pharmacologist or a pharmacist working in the hospital, to integrate all these medications and possibility of anticipate the possible risks. Okay, so risk identification, risk is nothing but the probability of harm to be caused. Okay, identifying the risk, and then only one can try to minimize the risk. So here probably the concept of adherence is also going to be merged with risk minimization or risk management strategy that is to be integrated with this concept of adherence. So from the patient's perspective, it is true adherence, but then when you consider adherence from a broader perspective, it is also to what extent the physician or the other healthcare providers, they are adhering to the basic principle of safer treatment to be provided. And all these components, all these tools are actually can be made available ultimately to translate the whole effort or the whole care delivery steps into a safer kind of or a most desired kind of patient outcome. Okay, that is the overall purpose. Okay, we have no right, or we have we cannot really afford to, in trying to do good to the patient, we cannot really afford to indulge in any kind of behavior that could increase the risk to the patient or that could ultimately cause some harm to the patient. So there is no place. We have to be consciously always trying to minimize iatrogenic issues. Okay, and only when we accept that there is a possibility or there is a risk of iatrogenic problem, then only we'll be trying to identify the strategies and means by which we can minimize these iatrogenic problems. So that is the whole purpose of a safer care delivery in healthcare practice. So with these few words, I think it was very wonderfully delivered today in these two twin lectures, initially by Dr. Sandeep Gupta and then by Dr. Shambhu Samrat Samazdar, and perhaps we have been able to send home the right message of exercising or complying with the principles of adherence from patient's angle and from the care provider's angle, so that ultimately a desired outcome happens to the patient, safer outcome is achieved by the patient. With this, I think we can close this technical session. It is now over to Dr. Shambhu and perhaps Mr. Rohan for having their concluding comments. Over to Shambhu. Dr. Shambhu, are you there?
Yes, sir. I am
Yeah.
there.
So you can have the closing remarks, and then Rohan can also have some say on this, and then we can close.
Yes, sir. So really, we are thankful to Professor Tripathi and Dr. Sandeep Gupta for giving us time today, and we have interactive discussions also today on this important topic. So today is the happy birthday of InnovoCare Health Solution and E-Academy. So we are really congratulate and giving you good wishes to this institution. Many happy returns of the day, InnovoCare E-Academy. So may I request Mr. Rohan Tripathi to have his concluding remarks.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Samazdar. First of all, I would like to thank everyone, all our speakers, Dr. Tripathi, Dr. Samazdar, and definitely Dr. the for this excellent
Dr.
session.
Sandeep Gupta.
Dr. Sandeep Gupta for this excellent session, excellent talk. And today is a very special day for us because this marks the third year celebration of iNovoCare Health Hub Solutions. iNovoCare E-Academy started a bit later in what we wanted to make best use of the time we were all locked down to have best access to provide best access, good access to online medical training and general awareness programs for the doctors and also sometimes the general masses. So we are so proud that we have been able to continue that for more than a year now. The series, the episode that was today was the 10th episode in a series of lectures on medicinal adherence. Today's session was headed by Dr. Sandeep Gupta. Dr. Shamazdar then was there with his session, and then finally we had Dr. Tripathi as our chairperson of the evening. So thank you so much. This is the 10th session, and we are having one such session on general awareness on adherence every month. So we are already on 10. We have 2 more to go. I hope to have all of you there. And with that, and kindly join our page, join our WhatsApp group. So to be connected, because we regularly keep on having sessions, and we all I will also get updated on sessions of other such medical education CMEs, continued medical education programs. Also, we recently lost a very experienced person of pharmacology, this field. I think Dr. Shamazdar or Dr. Tripathi would like to say a few words remembering the person.
Yeah, because we are from pharmacology and clinical pharmacology, it's a sad day also for us today. In fact, day before yesterday, that is on 28th of October, a giant in pharmacology, rather in from India, who is an academic giant, you can say, that is Professor Monindranath Ghosh. He was a renowned teacher in pharmacology, and he did his MBBS from RG Kar Medical College. We lost him. He died day before yesterday at the age of 98. So he was born in 1924. He did his graduation from RG Kar Medical College, and then he had his post graduation in University of London, and he had worked with another very renowned name in pharmacology, European pharmacology, Shield, O Shield, and he was the colleague of O Shield. And Professor Ghosh was the first director of JIPMER, Pondicherry, and he retired at the age of 60, and he died in 98, at the age of 98. That means 38 years after his retirement, he was in the city of Kolkata, his own house. He has tremendous contribution. He was also the recipient of the prestigious Bidhan Chandra Rai Award, National Award, and he also wrote a book on experimental pharmacology, which is almost like a Bible for all the postgraduate students in pharmacology. It's a book on experimental pharmacology. For the last 5 decades, the postgraduate students and scholars, they are reading this book, and we are very saddened that we have lost him. And until the last day also, he was quite active and alert and conscious and taking part in academic activities. So I take this opportunity to offer our very sincere condolences to the departed soul, and we pray peace to the departed soul. With these few words, I think we can close today's session. If Dr. Shambhu has anything to add or anything to say, may come up and we can close. Dr. Shambhu, are you there?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah, you can close the session now.
Okay, sir. Okay.